You're listening to TBR Radio Presents the Dixie Heritage Hour with your host, the Director of Dixie Heritage, Dr. Ed DeVries.
Our guest on this week's edition of TBR Radio Presents the Dixie Heritage Hour is my good friend, Dr. Kent Hovind. Dr. Hovind is one of our subscribers to the Dixie Heritage newsletter, and he has been for the last couple of years since he was fortunate enough to be released from federal custody. Dr. Hovind had spent 10 years in federal custody, having been charged with structuring when the feds could not find a real crime with which to prosecute this pastor and creation science teacher. Accused him of 26 counts of structuring. Basically what they did was they found 26 times that he had gone to his bank and withdrew less than $10,000, and they said that that was a crime. Crazy, I know. But while Dr. Hovind was in prison, he wrote over 30 books. One of them was called The Kennel. And in The Kennel, Dr. Hovind exposes the corruption and the evil of the prison system. He explains how the judges, the prosecutors, the defense attorneys, the police officers, the county sheriffs, as well as governors and senators and congressmen are all making obscene fortunes on the prison system. How the prison system is basically a big money-making racket that is making millionaires out of governors and judges and police chiefs and county sheriffs. It's just wicked. There's no other way to describe it. And rather than me trying to explain it all to you, I'll just take you straight into our interview with Dr. Kent Hovind, author of The Kennel.
Hello, Kent Hovind here.
Hello, Dr. Hovind. How are you today?
I'm overworked, I'm underpaid, I'm underappreciated, I'm way behind, but I never complain, never.
Why did you choose to write the book under a pseudonym?
Well, I wrote a book called The Kennel under the pseudonym Elijah Green because I was in prison at the time I wrote it. Elijah was a prophet that the king hated for no particular reason, and he wore green in my case. So we had green uniforms at that particular prison. Sometimes they're brown, sometimes they're green. So in the county jail, they're orange, but federal government is. So I just randomly picked the name Elijah Green because I didn't want to put my name on it. And while I was in prison, they were already being pretty hard on me. They moved me 32 times for no reason. You're supposed to be within 500 miles of your home. Well, they moved me Colorado, New Hampshire, New York. I was everywhere but 500 miles from home. So I figured I better not agitate them any more than necessary.
You feel at liberty now to say which prison you were in when you were writing the book?
Oh, yeah. I wrote it from several different ones. I think I started it while I was in Edgefield, Carolina. Or Jessup, Georgia. Jessup, Georgia is the one where Jim Baker was when he was in prison. I don't recall actually where I was. I wrote 37 books from prison, so I had plenty of time and I wanted to use it wisely, but I think it was either Jessup or Edgefield, South Carolina when I wrote it.
Were these things that you discovered at the prisons that you were in, or were these things that you discovered from other research?
I knew almost nothing about the prison system before I went. I didn't know where the courthouse was. They came and arrested me. I'd never been in trouble for anything. It's like, what happened here? What did they arrested me for structuring. I said, I don't even know what that is. They said, 5 years ago, you took money out of the bank in amounts less than $10,000. Okay, yeah. The whole case was just absolute bogus. Go to KentHovindIsInnocent.com. The guy did 15 months research just on my case. He came and lived here with us for 6 months. He read every single document. He put it all together. He said, Kent, you broke no laws at all. The government broke 100 laws to put you in prison. I said, I know. And then they stole everything, stole all the church property, everything. And then the U.S. attorney that did that, a couple of weeks after he seized the church bank account, he flew to Detroit to have sex with a 5-year-old, got off the airplane with Vaseline and a doll, and they arrested him and put him in jail, and he hung himself.
Wow.
That's John David Roy Atchison, October 5th, 2007. That's the date that he hung himself in prison. And I don't glory in that. I'm just pointing out that these are the people that come after me for taking our own money out of our own bank to pay our own bills. And there's no drugs involved at all, but they use drug laws to arrest me. If it hadn't happened to me, I would not believe the story. So to answer your question, I did not know where the jail or the prison was. I knew nothing about the system, but I was shocked to find out that congressmen, judges, lawyers own stock in the prison system. So the more people they lock up, the better for them.
Right.
The last prison I was in was Yazoo City, Mississippi. And I found out that there's a huge, huge prison there. I mean, there's a maximum, max security, a high security, medium security, a camp. It's probably 1,000 acres. I'm just guessing. I could probably look it up, I'm sure. Yazoo City. The governor of Mississippi, Haley Barbour, the right-wing conservative, Haley Barbour, owns the land and has a 99-year lease. And the federal government built on his land. I'm sure he gets a huge payment every month for leasing out 1,000 acres. His son, Haley Barbour Jr., is the chief federal judge in Jackson, Mississippi. Now, I think it just looks like, to the average person, like that's a conflict of interest, to have the guy who's doing the sentencing also be able to profit from the longer he gives you, the more sure they are to have a renter for that much time.
That's crazy.
It ought to be illegal. It ought to be criminal. No congressman, no lawyer, nobody on any public payroll should be allowed to profit from the prison system. Who pays for where do they get their food from? Who transports the food? Who transports the prisoners? It's not just owning the property. There are hundreds of ways they can make profit from the prison system. It's a money-making racket. And I found out since I wrote my book, I had my numbers close, but not quite right. America has 4% of the world's population and 26% of the world's prisoners. The land of the free has the largest prison system in the world by far, way bigger than Russia or China.
Why do you think it is that the prison population is so slanted in this country versus other countries that you think would be police states and prison cultures?
Well, because of the money. It's the love of money is the root of all evil. All evil. It is evil to take people away from their family and lock them up. I'm embarrassed. I've been a Christian for 40-some years. When I went to prison, I didn't realize God's word never calls for prisons. I mean, a lot of God's people were in prison, but that was from the heathen doing it, the Romans, the Egyptians, the Greeks. Under God's law, you get a fine. If you steal my sheep, you pay back 4 sheep, and everybody goes home. Actually, everybody goes home happy. I'm glad, man. Steal another one. I get 4 more sheep. So you either get fined or you get a beating. For certain crimes you lay down, but you can never get more than 40 stripes. That was under God's law. Or for other crimes, you get executed. I mean, today, if somebody rapes your daughter, they're going to lock them up for 20 years. She now is being punished again because she's got to work harder to pay more taxes to pay for his groceries and his guards to guard him. I mean, it costs 60 to 80 or to 100,000 a year, depending on what level of security they're at, per year for every prisoner. Who's paying that? Where's that money coming from? So your daughter gets raped, and now she watches the guy go to prison for 20 years. She now has 2 problems. She's paying more money to keep him alive, and she's worried about the day he gets out, or worried that he might escape. It is much better for everybody, psychologically, for everybody, if he gets executed. But what's the guy's wife supposed to do? He goes out and rapes a girl, and he goes to prison. Now, what's his wife and family supposed to do? Wait for 20 years? Under God's law, you execute him, and she can go find somebody else. It makes it harder on the wife of the criminal, harder on the family of the criminal, harder on the victims, harder on society. Except somebody profits up the chain, probably a judge or whoever owns the prison or owns the food supply system or owns some of the judges, like in Pensacola, one of the judges owns the organization that rehabs prisoners when they come out. Well, think about that for 2 minutes. They're profiting. For the more people they lock up, the more people they make on their secondary business. It's criminal in my totally humble and totally unbiased opinion.
And these are just the government-run prisons. I know in your book you also talk about privately owned prisons.
Well, yeah, it's prison for profit. See, anybody can come, anybody, there are large companies that come in and start a prison in your county or state on the condition that you promise to keep it 90% full. So if it drops to less than 90% occupancy, the state or county or whoever came to this agreement has to pay you. So you're guaranteed to get a certain amount of income because they're going to spend X number of $1 million to build these buildings. Okay. They want to make sure it's an investment. It's nothing but a Wall Street investment. They don't care what it does for the lives of the people. Only about 3% of all the people in American prisons are in for any kind of violent crime, like armed robbery or rape or murder. 97% are in for a nonviolent crime. What if we followed God's law and said, okay, you get a fine or you get a beating or you get executed? It'd be real cheap. What does it cost to lock up a murderer for 20 years versus what does it cost for a .357 shell to shoot him in the head? What's that, about 80 cents for a .357?
Right.
I mean, and it's over and everybody's happy, except for the person who would have made a profit off of this.
So tell us, Dr. Hovind, in your book you mentioned the hole. What is the hole?
So I was being moved all over the place, and I was in a solitary confinement room because they didn't have any place to put me. So for 30 days, I was in what they call the hole. It's a little room, 7 feet wide by 14 feet long, and a window about 4 inches wide. And I looked out the window, and there's the guy coming, another prisoner coming down the hallway pushing a book cart. And so I hollered through the door, hey, let me see what you got. You know, I like to read books. I read like 1,800 books while I was in prison. And he had The Animal Farm by George Orwell, which was written back in 1946. And I was supposed to read it in high school, but never did. You know, one of those kind of things. It was assigned, but didn't do it. So I got the book. It's not a very big book, about the size of my book, The Kennel. And it's a story of, maybe you know the story already, about the pigs take over the farm and they kick out the farmer and they slowly run the farm into the ground because they don't know how to manage anything. It's a complete satire on communism without ever mentioning communism. It's classic, okay? It's called The Animal Farm, George Orwell. Later, he wrote 1984, another classic book. But anyway, I thought this is perfect. He's using animals as a satire to show the stupidity of communism. Let me do the same thing with dogs, the kennel, a giant dog kennel, to show the stupidity of our prison system. And in the story, The Kennel, the dogs get locked up for just stupid things, just so they can keep the prison full, the kennel full, just so the people who own the kennel can make money. It's all money. It's evil. When I become king, I'm shutting it all down. Let's look at it from the criminal's perspective. Suppose you murder somebody. Okay, you're a bad guy. You go murder somebody. You're found guilty. There's no question you're guilty. So the judge says, would you like 20 years in prison, or would you like to be executed? Even if the choice is yours, I think a large percentage of them would choose execution for the sake of their family to move on.
Well, even for themselves, I think they might prefer just to end it as opposed to having to.
Exactly right. Now, God said they don't get a choice for kidnapping or for rape or for murder. You get executed. You don't get a choice in it. But even if we only went one step toward that direction and said, let's at least give people an option. Suppose you're found guilty of breaking into a store and stealing stuff, and the judge said you're guilty. You stole $500 worth of stuff. You pay back 4 times, $2,000, or you go to jail for 5 years. Would you rather pay back $2,000 or go to jail for 5 years?
I think most people would pick the $2,000.
Okay. Suppose you're found guilty of some crime that the Bible calls for a beating, and the judge says you got a choice. Lay down right here on the floor. We're going to give you 20 lashes with this cane, or 5 years in prison. Would you take the 20 lashes or the 5 years?
Probably the 20 lashes.
Sure, it's going to hurt, but it's over. If you told your son, hey, son, you broke the rules, I'm going to give you 5 swats every day for the next 6 months. He'd say, Dad, how about give it all to me at once? Let's get this over with. See, prison is nothing but a prolonged, protracted beating. That's all it is. It punishes you a long time rather than get it over. And God's law, it's over with that day. It's a one-day thing. You're guilty, you pay your fine or take your beating or get executed, and everybody goes home. It's real, and I'm embarrassed. I didn't see that in God's law until I went to prison and thought, wow, the law of the Lord is perfect.
Well, you know, one thing, too, in God's law is, with the exception of capital crimes, is the restitution is made to the victim, whereas in our current system, there is no restitution to the victim.
No, the court or the county makes the money. If there's any restitution, you're right. It doesn't go to the victim. It's evil. I'm shutting it all down. When I become king, I'm going to shut it all down. I'll tell you right now.
There are politicians you were talking about. For example, Governor Barber owns the land and he leases it to the prison. In your book, you talk about other politicians and office holders, senators, congressmen, judges, and how they're all getting pieces of this pie.
That's correct. It's not right, but it's correct.
So what exactly are the pie pieces, and how do these individual politicians get their piece?
Well, you can Google prison industries. It's actually on the stock market. You can own stock in prison industries. There are companies that run the prisons. Like, for instance, let's say your county has a county jail. Well, they don't want to have to cook the food and buy the food and order the food and store the food, so they'll sub that out to some company in your county, and Joe's Bakery will supply all the stuff, all the food. or something, okay? And so the food service is a giant part of the prison industry that is normally privately owned, but anybody can invest in that business as a stock. So you could own stock in Jones Bakery knowing that they've got a for sure customer with the county jail. And you know Jones Bakery is going to make a profit. So there are lots of ways they can invest. There is a giant industry that does nothing but transport federal prisoners. They've got a whole bus fleet constantly running around the country. They've got several giant airplanes. I've been on for 4 of them. They handcuff you, chain around your waist, handcuffed to the chain, and you sit on the airplane. I was on one for 13 hours. We flew from Jacksonville, Florida, all the way to California, and then back to Colorado before I got off. Okay, who owns that airplane? It's not federal government. It's a private contractor that they contract to the government to transport prisoners. Anybody can invest in that company that owns these airplanes and these buses. So it's an investment. And it's normally the congressmen, senators, governors, judges who know this is going to be a money-making business because they're supplying the people for it.
When these politicians start these companies, wouldn't that essentially constitute insider trading?
Absolutely. It's 100%. It's insider trading. It's evil. Let's suppose you are a police officer and you own stock in one of the ways of making money off of the local county jail. You're a county cop and you own stock either in the food industry or in somebody buys the clothing. All of our clothing in the county jail had a tag in the back of the neck that said Robert Baker. Not Robert Baker. Who was the guy that did the talk show? Yeah, is it Robert Baker? Anyway, yeah, he supplies all the uniforms. Who does all the laundry to wash all those uniforms and clothing? Well, that's again a private company. They contract out to do all that. Now, if you're a cop and you also own stock in the industry that supplies the food or the clothing for the prison, and you stop somebody, and you could really say, nah, go ahead, this is borderline. You're probably going to be leaning toward, no, let's go ahead and get them arrested and put them in jail because this profits me in my other investments. It's going to taint your performance of your other job as a cop or as a judge or as a lawyer. I mean, it goes on down the chain. It is definitely insider trading, or there's other terms for it, but they're profiting twice. It's just pure evil.
Let's take a break here, and we'll be back in about 60 seconds after we hear a word from our sponsor, the Barnes Review.
If you love listening to the Dixie Heritage Hour, then I know that you'll love reading the Barnes Review. The Barnes Review is one of my favorite magazines. I began reading the Barnes Review long before they became a sponsor here on the program. In the Barnes Review, you will read vignettes of man, from the prehistoric to the very recent, from forgotten races and civilizations to first-person accounts of World War II and the late Cold War. There's just not a more interesting magazine published today, nor a more significant and important subject than real history. So if you'll visit www.barnesreview.org, that's www.barnesreview.org, you can find out how you too can become a subscriber to the Barnes Review. You can subscribe to receive the Barnes Review by mail, or you can subscribe to receive the Barnes Review electronically in PDF editions. Or you could subscribe to receive both. That's what I do. So visit www.barnesreview.org and subscribe to the Barnes Review.
We're back with our guest, Dr. Kent Hovind, author of The Kennel. Dr. Hovind, to kind of continue the conversation where we left off, are public defenders profiting by not seeking acquittals for their clients?
If he owns stock in the prison system, oh yeah. The more cases he loses, the better for him. He gets his paycheck, whether he wins or loses, he gets the same paycheck. Public pretender does.
Right.
But now he gets more money on the backside from his other investment. It's always about the money. Follow the yellow brick road.
And so you had talked about how the prison population has increased 700% in the last few decades.
Right, and for women, it's 1,200%.
So is it more profitable to incarcerate women than it is men?
There just happens to be a greater increase in women prisoners. I don't know why, but it's just the statistics show 1,200% increase.
Okay. And you talk about in your book prison overcrowding and how the politicians can increase their profits by basically underbidding prisons and then overpopulating them.
Right. They have rules in place that say you're allowed to be 20% overcrowded. For instance, if someone goes to what they call the hole or solitary confinement, I was in there 5 different times for not for doing anything wrong, just because in the process of moving me, that's the only place they had to keep me. I never got in any trouble in any of the jails I was at. But while you're in the solitary confinement, well, that they can charge more. Let's suppose it's $50 a day for a regular room. Well, they can charge $80 a day for somebody in solitary confinement. They can charge to the county or to the state, hey, we've got 10 prisoners in solitary confinement, so you've got to pay us $80 a day instead of 50. So they want to keep the solitary confinement rooms full also because they make more money off of those.
And so that was the room that you referred to as the shed in your book, The Kennel.
Yes, yep. Because you're going to get more money off of that.
We talked about food here a few minutes ago. You'd said in your book that food companies donate spoiled food and get a tax deduction?
Yep, get a tax deduction by donating it, or they can still sell it because you're allowed under the law to give prisoners food that's outdated. And you're allowed to be 20% overcrowded. It's interesting, in the solitary confinement or the hole, they're only allowed to keep prisoners in there for 6 months, and they have to take them out. So what they'll do after 6 months, they'll take you out, take you in for an interview with the warden, and then put you back in for 6 more months. After all, you have been out of your cell. So it starts the clock all over again.
And so the food companies are feeding rotten food to the inmates then?
I don't know that they always are. I know that they can, and nothing is ever done. And then there's commissary. You only got one place you can buy stuff, and it's a 30% markup on everything, pretty much across the board, I believe. So that if a Snickers costs, $1 on the street, it's $1.30 in the prison. And who owns the commissary? Some private judge, lawyer, congressman, senator, governor. They'll buy stock in or completely own that supplies the commissary, and you've got a completely captive audience, literally, because you can't go shopping. There's no competition. You either buy it here or you don't get it.
You had talked about in the book there was one particular prison, and the vending machines in the visitors area had a tremendous markup, like 300%, 400%, and the money from that actually went to the guards.
Right. They have a Christmas fund where every Christmas, so much, whatever the profit is from the visiting room, gets divided up. Every prison, they may do it differently, but the ones I saw, they said, oh yeah, this is our Christmas bonus, the profit from all these vending machines. So you got your family comes to visit you in the visiting room. They've only got one place they can buy stuff. That's it. You can't bring anything in. So they'll go buy a Coke for $3 instead of $2 or $1.50. And again, that goes back to somebody's making money off of this.
You'd also talked in the book about how people get paid commissions to increase the prison population. How does that work?
But many people have written on this where they have to lock up so many people a year to keep things open, or keep the prisons open.
And you'd also talked about using the inmates as basically slave labor in for-profit businesses, be they farms or factories.
Oh yeah, there's a whole prison industry where they will produce things like the one in in Marion, Florida. The prison there takes in old computers and takes them apart and separates all the parts. They've got all the brackets, the screws, the screens, the hard drives. They completely disassemble old computers or old copy machines, and they save all the parts so that then they can resell the prison can resell all those used computer parts. But they're paying the inmates. Like I worked in the kitchen many times, and if I'd work all week, all month, and my paycheck was $5.25 a month. $5.25 a month for working 6-7 hours a day, 5 days a week. It's who's profiting from that? You always got to look at the money. Like I said, follow the yellow brick road. Right. It'll lead you to a strange place like Oz where everything is backwards.
Well, I know several years ago I was a chaplain in the prison system in Texas, and I had no idea that there was, a lot of this stuff I had no idea was going on around me. but I know one of the prisons there, they had a rubber factory that actually manufactured tires. And they not
Right.
only used these tires on state vehicles, but they also sold the surplus production of tires to other companies. And I know there was another prison that had a commercial grade food canning a factory in it, and it was attached to another prison that had a farm, and they would can the vegetables and literally put labels on them for major food manufacturing companies, as well as generic labels for store brands, and these would get distributed to grocery stores. And of course, the prison system was making money on that with inmate labor.
Well, not only was the prison making money on it, this is hurting all the farmers who have a legitimate job, because now the prison's able to pay their people 2 cents an hour, and the farmer's got to pay his people $15 an hour. He can't compete. So this harms all your local farmers. It sounds great. Wow, we're making food cheaper, but actually it's illegal. It's like slave labor. It's no different than slave labor that I can see.
And you'd also talked about how they keep the prison population at capacity by keeping inmates beyond their sentences.
Well, they tried to give me 20 more years for mailing a letter. They gave me a charge the last year of my prison, mail fraud. Mail fraud carries 20 years for mailing a letter to the courthouse. Nothing secret about it.
So
it's evil, brother. Okay, let's go back to your people making tires at this prison. What if there's a company in the same town or the same state that also makes tires, but they have it as a regular business? They've got to pay their people. They've got to pay taxes. Do you think they can compete with the prisoners for, 10 cents an hour and no benefits?
well,
you're going to put that
they can't.
Yeah, you're going to put the other company out of business. Now, all Gideon had in the Bible for weapons was light and noise. Shine the light, make a bunch of noise. And he won the battle because the enemy fought each other. My job as a Christian, at least on this prison issue topic and maybe some other topics, is I just simply shine the light and make noise, and I hope they fight each other. The congressmen and judges who own stock in this system ought to be fighting each other, putting each other in jail, because this is insider trading. It is criminal. It's double dipping. There's all kinds of ways you can describe it, but in anybody's book, it's wrong.
Well, let's pause here, Dr. Hovind, and we'll have a brief word from our sponsor, the American Free Press.
If you're like me, and I'll bet you are because you're listening to the Dixie Heritage Hour, you like to be on the cutting edge of honest news and accurate information. 26 times a year, the American Free Press newspaper can be delivered to your door, packed with the kind of uncensored news that I know you're going to appreciate. If you're ever dissatisfied with your subscription to the American Free Press, their guarantee is that you just drop them an email and they will gladly refund the unused portion of your subscription. So what are you waiting for? Visit www.americanfreepress.net.
We're back with our guest, Dr. Kent Hovind, author of The Kennel. In your book, you mention waste in the prison system. Of course, we know that the government is not exactly known for its efficiency, but you explain how in the prison system, in particular, waste is rewarded.
Well, yes, they don't care if they make a profit. They don't have to. One prison I was at, they had a gigantic garden where the prisoners would work all day out in the garden and supply food for the prison. Well, that sounds great, but that same prison is charging X amount of dollars per year per prisoner to the state or to the feds for feeding the prisoners. So if they can raise their own food and cut the cost, it actually is more profit for the people running that prison. I mean, it's good that the guys have something to do, and it's good to give them all a job, etc. But people don't realize the subtle nature of how this hurts so many other people, legitimate farmers in the area. And if you took the profit motive out of it, the whole prison industry would collapse. See, most other countries don't do this. So they don't try to lock people up because it costs them money. But Americans figured out a way to make money off of locking people up. So 97% of the people in prison or jail are in for some non-violent crime. Fine them or beat them and send them home. If I was king today, I could thin the prison system down to about 2% of its current size in one day, just by giving everybody who's in there the option of taking a biblical punishment or stay in jail. Most of them would say, man, what's my fine? I'll pay it. I'll go home. If it's a financial crime, then just pay back 4 times and go home.
In your book, you talk about how the government has literally created crimes in the last couple of decades, specifically so that they can incarcerate more people.
I believe that's correct, but it gets worse than that. Karl Marx, the founder of communism, said, if you're going to have communism run a country, you have to be able to lock up anybody you want at a moment's notice. So what you do is you pass contradictory laws and just simply don't enforce them. For instance, you pass a law that says you must drive on the right side of the street. Then you pass another law that says you cannot drive on the right side of the street. Well, you can't do both. But they just simply don't enforce it unless they want to stop, their political opponent and put him in jail. Well, then they stop, Jim Smith, who's running for sheriff or running for your job. Oh, he was driving on the right side of the street. And the law says you can't. By passing contradictory laws, you can lock up anybody anytime you want.
I know when they couldn't nail you for an actual or a specific crime, they charged you with structuring, which, as we discussed before, is just whatever the prosecutor wants to say it is at the time of the prosecution. I know another thing that's becoming popular now is people are being jailed for conspiracy, which means, once again, they didn't commit a crime, but I guess they thought about it.
Isn't that stupid?
Yeah.
Capitals, yes, yeah.
And so essentially, are these new crimes, not only are they things that previously were not criminal, it's almost as if the crime is whatever the government says it is at the time, like structuring.
Exactly right. So the structure, they used drug laws to put me in jail and seized all the church property. The drug law. I've never taken drugs. I took an aspirin 6 months ago. I've never tasted alcohol. They used drug laws to arrest me and put me in prison. It's not only stupid, it's evil.
And so you talk in chapter 5 about cage brokers. Tell me about cage brokers.
Well, that would be the people who make an investment to promise to keep it full. There are people, you can actually buy stock in prison industries, and their job is to make money off of this. They're like a stockbroker. Call your stockbroker, just call anyone out of the phone book, any stockbroker, and say, can I buy stock in the federal or state or county prison system? And they'll say, oh yeah, sure, it's under prison industries. How many shares of stock would you like? So there are brokers who deal in this, in addition to the conspiracy goes so deep, brother. If it's bizarre, it's hard to believe it's happening in America, but it's been happening. And it really started in the early 70s when Rockefeller and some other folks realized, man, here's a way to make a lot of money. They keep hollering, tough on crime, tough on crime. Oh, come on, it's tough on families. They're not trying to be tough on crime. They're the ones bringing the drugs in so that there can be a drug problem, so they can arrest people and lock them up in jail for taking drugs. And yet they brought them in. That's what the whole Vietnam War was about. One of the major causes of the war was to be able to get more access to more drugs. A lot of those airplanes fly. The soldiers will tell you, airplanes flying back and forth full of coffins of soldiers. The coffins are full of drugs in many cases.
And I know a number of years ago, I remember that there was an individual, I do not remember his name, but I remember he was supposed to testify in a federal court that he was a military pilot and that he was flying drugs from South America to the Bush Ranch outside of Waco, Texas.
And he mysteriously died.
Yes, he did.
Yeah, I did not know that, but I could guess that.
And so
but many people told me that it was George Bush that ordered them to get a crackdown on tax protesters in Pensacola and to get me to shut me up. I can't prove that, but that's what several people told me.
Well, what do you think? Can you think of anything in particular that you were saying or preaching that got their dander up?
Oh, absolutely. The guys who started this country 230 years ago, they said, we hold these truths to be self-evident. All men are created equal. They're endowed by their creator with certain rights, life, liberty, pursuit of happiness. Question, where do rights come from? Do you have the right to get married? Or do you have to buy that from the state with a license? Do you have the right to drive a car? Or do you have to buy that from the state? Most people don't realize driver's licenses are only required for commercial vehicles. Many people drive without a license. They say, I don't need the state's. Now, I don't do that, but I'm just pointing out that in my seminar, part 5, I talk about how the evolution theory is the foundation for communism, socialism, Nazism, Marxism, and the New World Order. They don't want people to think that they have rights that come from God. Those people don't make good slaves. They'll throw the tea in the harbor and start a big war because they think they have rights that came from God. So I mentioned that in my video number 5 about the how evolution is not only a stupid idea, it's dangerous. It's a foundation of all these isms, communism. When they came and raided our ministry with the SWAT team, they said, get every DVD number 5 you can find. And they searched the place with a fine-tooth comb trying to find all the DVD number 5. That's the one they wanted to. That's what they arrested me for. They never said that. They looked for something else. Structuring. What on earth is that? They gave me 10 years in prison for structuring. I'd never heard of it. It's not, and it didn't even break the law. But even if I had, it's the stupid law. And the maximum sentence for structuring was 0 to 6 months. But the judge said, this crime is worse than rape. I'm enhancing this to 10 years.
How does the judge legally basically change the prescribed sentence, or was it an illegal proclamation that simply no one has the ability to challenge?
Well, question, what if a judge, a federal judge, does not follow the law? They're appointed for life, It's a lifetime appointment. Once you're a federal judge, you're good for life. What's the check and balance with that? Well, the only check and balance with the federal judge is Congress can impeach them.
And when's the last time that that's happened?
Do you know how many people have been impeached since America started 230 years ago? Total number of impeachments. Total. Judges, presidents, everybody.
How many?
19.
And how many of those impeachments were actually removed from office?
I don't know, but I know probably 19,000 needed to be impeached. See, they have nothing to fear because they know nothing will happen to them. They rule with impunity. They're not the least bit afraid of being impeached because they've all got dossiers on all the congressmen who would be voting to impeach them. They say, "Oh yeah, you're going to impeach us? Well, we're going to show these pictures we took of you with this, prostitute or something, or at this drug party." They purposely get bad dirt on all of them so that they can blackmail them should the need arise. So no, nobody ever gets impeached. So Judgment Day is going to be very interesting when God reveals everything because He's not afraid of anybody.
Another thing you had talked about is not only the fact that all of these new laws have been created to basically increase the prison population, but also that the burden of proof itself, innocent until proven guilty, has been removed from the process.
Well, yeah, it's very important that people get convicted so they can keep the prison full. So yeah, you're guilty till proven guilty.
And then, there's also piling on charges. You arrests now, and you look at prosecutions now, and a person did, they committed one crime. Well, what you would think of as one crime, they robbed a liquor store. But yet there are 46 counts in the robbery of the liquor store.
Right, because they stole 46 packs of cigarettes.
Right.
Or something. Yeah. It's rather than just one count of robbery. I know they do that all. Like with me, 45 counts of structuring. Every time we went to the bank and made a withdrawal, they added a new charge. None of them broke the law, but they added 45 counts. Why not just one count of structuring?
But when a jury looks at that and they see somebody who has, numerous counts against them, it almost plants the thought in the jury's brain that, well, they must be guilty of something.
That's exactly why they do it. Bingo, you are on it, brother.
So you talk about points in your book and why the officers want them.
It's run differently in different prisons or jails. There's three different systems at least. There's a federal system, there's a state system, and there's a county system. And sometimes a fourth one, which would be a city. Your city may have its own prison system, a jail, and a police force, etc. Now, in the case of Jacksonville, Florida, they just combined the two. The county and the city is all just one, so they don't have to have redundant, police officers, etc. But I don't remember all the details on the point system. But I read about that somewhere while I was studying for that book and thought, this is crazy that they can get, the more people they lock up, the more benefits them. They get raises and stuff based on how many. It may be a totally off the record thing because they don't want to get in trouble, because that would be so obviously evil.
Kind of like the speeding ticket quotas that every police agency in America denies exist.
Right. Yep. You got to give out so many speeding tickets.
And, of course, officially speaking, there are no quotas anywhere, but.
Oh, no, of course not.
Yeah,
of course
we
not.
all know better. You had talked about how even the halfway houses are a racket.
Well, yeah, after you get out of prison, in many cases, they say, well, if you get out early, you can go to a halfway house. Now you have to report in and you have to do certain things. Well, hold on. Who profits off that halfway house? Who owns that? Who buys their groceries? You got to always follow the money.
And so is it the same judges and congressmen and politicians and policemen?
It can be.
Okay.
It sure can be.
You'd also talked about how you're sentenced to however many months in the halfway house, yet a lot of people only spend days at the halfway house, but the halfway house still gets paid for their full.
Oh, right. Yeah, if you're sentenced to 5 months in the halfway house and they've got 100 beds, well, they may let you stay for a month and then go home, but you still pay $20 or $50 or whatever a week for that bed, and then they put somebody else in it. They may have 10, 15 people paying every day for that same bed and only one person ever using it because they let you go home if you keep paying. How's that for a money-making racket?
Yeah. So I know we're kind of going backwards here a little bit, but when we were talking about inmates working in the prison, you mentioned in your book that OSHA regulations do not apply to the prison industries.
Correct. You don't have to have the same safety standards.
And so the result of that is a lot of injuries.
Well, I don't know. I haven't documented that. I suspect so. And there's nothing the prisoner can do. He has no recourse.
Mm-hmm. So I assume there's a whole nother set of ways to make money on providing medical treatment for the inmates as well.
That's another thing. Yep. And who transports them to the doctors and stuff like that. And so, the doctors who work, the doctors in the prison system are the ones that can't get a job anywhere else.
And so the injuries, I would assume, when they happen, are probably profitable for the prison.
Correct. Yeah, you'd chase that rabbit a long ways, but I think you'd find it leads to a money-making for some politician or judge or somebody somewhere.
You also talked about the sanitary conditions in prison and how they're not the best.
Correct, especially county jail. They are incredibly awful. But see, there's, again, who's going to hold them? Who holds their feet to the fire? Who makes them obey the law? They are the law.
Right. And so I assume that there's money being made cleaning the prison, even though it's not being cleaned.
Or cleaning supplies. Who supplies the soap and, et cetera. But yeah, it's money all the way around. I mean, how many different ways do you spend money on your household? Let's see, you got to heat it, air conditioning, food, cleaning, maintenance. Okay, well, you got the same thing on a grander scale with a prison with 1,000 men in there.
Right.
Who profits?
And you'd also mentioned that 70% of inmates are released with an infectious disease.
Oh, yeah, quite a number. That's a statistic somebody sent me while I was doing research for this book, and they said many, especially people who've been in for a long, long time, usually after 1 year of prison, you've contracted something that's going to stick with you for life. They call it the prison cough. I have it. Watch my YouTube.
You had not only talked in your book about inmates being released with infectious diseases, you even implied that in many cases the inmates are intentionally infected with pathogens, almost as though they're being used as lab rats in some kind of sick medical experiment.
Absolutely, yeah. They're allowed to do medical research on prisoners without the prisoner's knowledge. Everything's documented at the bottom of the page in the book, The Kennel. They can get it from drdino.com. Medical research. See, the university might call and say, I need 50 people to do the testing on. We're going to put something in their food and to see what effect it has. Oh, well, we got 50 prisoners. Then they'll just do it without even telling you.
And so basically the inmates become lab rats.
Exactly right. Yep. Human lab rats.
And I'm going to guess that you never knew that it happened. You were never told?
No. I don't know if it happened to me or not, but I was never told.
Okay.
I sure never volunteered for it.
I'm just going to ask you, do you think that constitutes cruel and unusual punishment?
No, absolutely.
Yeah.
Just locking a person up, period, is cruel and unusual punishment. If they're going to get, like for your son, if your son did something wrong and you said, son, I'm going to lock you in your bedroom for 3 years, I'll bring you food as you need it. Would that be cruel and unusual punishment to lock your son in his bedroom for 3 years?
Yes, it would be.
How about for 3 months?
Yes.
Sure. Okay, so what is the difference what we're doing in our prison system?
Right.
If you're going to punish them, punish them. God's law is perfect. You fine them, beat them, or kill them.
You had mentioned earlier that to maintain the prison population, that sentences are often extended, that the inmate is kept beyond their prescribed sentence if that's necessary for maintaining the population. In your book, you had mentioned how in many cases the inmate will be accused of a crime, and it doesn't matter whether or not they actually committed the crime while they were in prison, because they'll receive no due process, there'll be no trial. Simply the accusation of the crime is enough to add years to their sentence and to keep them in the prison indefinitely.
That is correct. They can, in some cases, in some counties, and there's ways. See, the prisons, but one thing they can do, because in federal prison, for instance, you serve 85% of your sentence. So if you can get 15% off for good behavior, just simply by don't get in trouble, and instead of serving 10 years, you serve 8.5 years. Yeah, but if the prison needs you there for that extra 1.5 years, they are the ones who decide if you get the 1.5 years off or not. So if they're underpopulated, they can remove your good time. You can lose good time at just with no trial, no nothing. So the feds rule you get to serve 85% of your sentence, but in reality, it's up to the prison how much time you serve. So they can decide, well, our beds are, we need somebody to fill that bed so we can collect money, because they get paid based on how many people are locked up. So they can say, nah, remove, he's going to lose 30 days or 60 days or 90 days or a year of good time because he didn't behave. That's just plain too bad. If you don't like it, tough.
Right. Another thing you had mentioned is how rape is only a misdemeanor rather than a felony in prison, and you said that in private prisons it's not even a crime.
That's what I have heard. Now, in the federal prison camps where I was, I never saw any indication of that problem. But especially in longer term prisons, see, you can, if you have a sentence of 10 years or less, you can serve it out in the low security or the camp. Now, federal prison camps are basically a joke. They're like a college dormitory. There's not even a fence. There's just a sign, don't go past this point. Now, see, there's camps, which is I was at, and then low security will have a fence around it. Medium security has 2 fences and barbed wire. High security has 2 fences, barbed wire, and guards with guns. So that's how they charge more per day for those in the higher security. So the more high security people you get, is better for the people who are making money off the prison system. Again, the money making racket. Follow the yellow brick road.
Well, I had a theory, and I had this theory 20 years ago, and you sort of validated it for me in parts of your book. And my theory was this, that when Prohibition ended, that there were a lot of federal agents who were about to be unemployed for lack of something to enforce, for lack of something to do. And so what we now know as drug laws were quickly put into place to replace the prohibition laws just to keep a bunch of federal employees on the payroll.
Excellent theory. I think it could be easily proven. I haven't looked at that, but it sure sounds something worth looking into.
But
Because, for instance, why is marijuana illegal? I've never taken it and never will, but it's a weed, for heaven's sake. If somebody wants to, the simple solution is, if I was king, I would legalize all drugs and eliminate all welfare. The problem will fix itself. If you want to take drugs or go get drunk, that's fine. Now, if you want to drive on the highway, that's different. But if you just don't show up to work and your boss fires you, now you don't have any income, and so you go broke. But now they just go on welfare. If you're going to legalize all drugs, you'd have to also eliminate all welfare same day. And the Bible system is very simple. If you don't work, you don't eat.
right.
Not complicated at all.
Well, I think that, my theory was that by creating these drug laws, that it would keep all of these federal agents basically employed. But now reading your book, I could see where now as the prison system came to be seen by different people in the political realm as a profitable enterprise, the expansion of those drug laws has enabled them not only to keep people on the federal payroll, but it's also enabled them to really monopolize on and expand a very profitable enterprise, being the prison industry.
Absolutely. Always the money. Some of the other Bible versions have changed. 1 Timothy 6:10. 1 Timothy 6:10 says the love of money is the root of all evil. And other versions will say it's the root of all kinds of evil. No, it's the root of all evil. It'll be at the root of it someplace. Now, you don't always see the root. Matter of fact, you seldom see the root. Usually you see the stem or the leaves or the fruit. But the root of all evil is the love of money.
Right.
And there are people, judges, lawyers, there's no difference. They love money, and they don't seem to be embarrassed about double dipping in the system like this. I think they should be. I think it ought to be criminal. And I think maybe a program like yours, if you publish it well, will help people see what on earth are we doing here. Stop this insanity.
Right. I know, and we had a show where we dealt with this at length. Here just a couple of weeks ago, we had Carl Edwards, who is the chairman of the Constitution Party, is our guest, and we talked about jury nullification at length. But you had mentioned in your book how jury nullification is a forgotten legal doctrine that could basically help to stick a monkey wrench in this whole thing.
Well, that's what our founders put into it very clearly. That's why you have to have a unanimous verdict on a jury. See, if your county passes a law that says, or if the feds come in and pass a law let's say you can't do something, and you think the law is stupid. Let's suppose they pass a law that says you can't spit on the sidewalk. Okay. And you think, hey, they've got no right to say that. So they catch somebody spitting on the sidewalk. And sure enough, they've got video footage and 10 witnesses, he did spit on the sidewalk, there's no question. But you think the law is stupid. So they call it, you get on the jury. I tell people when they're calling you in for jury, play dumb. Get on the jury. Once you're on the jury, then you are like God in the court system. You can vote any way you want, and they can't even question you. You'll never be called into question for any vote you do as a juror. So they can put you on a jury, and you can say, not guilty. And the rest of the jurors will say, what do you mean not guilty? We saw him spit on the sidewalk. Here's the video footage. What's the matter with you? Nope, not guilty. And he goes free. That's jury nullification.
So you had mentioned at the back of your book, you had mentioned several things that would be needed or helpful changes to correct some of these. Why don't you just share a few of those with us real quick?
Well, just getting politicians or people in office who know how it ought to be. Most of them are blind leaders of the blind. They don't have a good standard to go by, which is where the Christian standard, if you get a bunch of people who know the Bible, they might not all be Bible believers, they might not all be independent Baptists, but at least they know the Bible, and they look at that as a guide for here's how it ought to be. They would then work toward ways of minimizing the prison system and they would say it's illegal to own stock in the prison system if you profit in any way from the prison system and you're also involved in any form of law enforcement. That should be illegal. I mean, that's a no-brainer. No cops, no judges, no senators, no lawyers should be allowed to profit in any way from the prison system. And they will say, well, we don't know, we just bought stock, in a company, and that company owns the prison system. So there's ways they have already planned of how to try to get around it, which is why we shouldn't even have this system to begin with. It's probably not tamper-proof. Close it down.
So we're starting to run out of time here, Dr. Hovind. Would you tell us really quickly about the other books that you had written in prison?
Well, I wrote 37 books from prison. That's the only one I wrote that's not about the creation or evolution. So that's my main calling in life, is to those topics, teach the Bible and science and stuff like that. But I just felt like that's a dog I got to kick as I walk by. If you know what I mean.
Right. It's interesting that you would talk about kicking dogs in a book that you call The Kennel.
Yep. Some dogs need a swift kick. And yeah, I hope the book helps people come to their senses and say, man, it's just like the Animal Farm book caused so many people to wake up to the evils of communism. I hope I can wake people up to the evils of our prison system. It's generally been the right-wing conservatives like me who have called for longer terms, and I was guilty, 3 strikes and you're out, lock them up, throw away the key. It's wrong. We're doing it all wrong.
Very quickly, tell us about the Dinosaur Adventureland theme park that you're building in Alabama.
Yes, sir. About 2 months till we open. We'll never be done, but we hope it'll at least be open in a couple months. I taught science for 15 years, high school science and mathematics. I believe the Bible is literally true, and the evolution theory is not only stupid, it's dangerous. It's a dumb, dangerous idea to teach the kids they're just nothing but an animal, and there's no such thing as right and wrong. And so Dinosaur Adventureland will be a science center, a theme park, a museum, all based on science and the Bible. And we're purposely doing it low tech and low budget so that other people can do one in their backyard. We want hundreds of these across the country where people use science to teach kids the truth. Everything we do has a science lesson and a Bible lesson. For instance, we make a paper airplane that'll go 300 or 400 feet. Our record's 450 with a paper airplane. It blows kids' minds. They say, I can't believe this. Well, and we tell them, kids, ordinary paper, if it's properly prepared and properly motivated, it can do things you just simply can't believe. And they watch it, and it's stunning to watch my airplanes fly. And then we tell them an ordinary kid, if they get properly prepared and properly motivated, which might take a belt or a 2x4, cattle prod, they can do things you would never dream they could do just by being properly prepared and properly motivated.
So will this Dinosaur Adventureland, will it be bigger, smaller, about the same scale as the one that you had operated in Pensacola before your incarceration?
Well, the one in Pensacola, we had 4 acres right in my backyard. It included the whole ministry. And we had 100,000 visitors from every state and 120 countries come to visit Dinosaur Adventureland. This one is 140 acres and has 10 lakes and camping facilities and out in the country, boondocks. So I'm hoping it'll be much bigger and better and all that stuff. But while we're building it, we're also fully aware that the economy is due to crash at any moment. So we're stepping on the gas but covering the brakes, if you know what I mean. At the same time, when you drive on ice, you got to do that. And we're headed for a crash, a financial crash in this country. So we're being a little cautious.
Right. So your website, secondpeter3.com or drdino.com, both of those are still...
Well, 2 Peter 3 just links over to Dr. Dino. The main site the only site is Dr. Dino, DRDINO, drdino.com.
And so our listeners can go to drdino.com and they can find the Kennel as well as all of the other books that you'd written before, during, and after prison?
Yes, sir.
Well, that's all the time that we have today for this week's edition of TBR Radio Presents, the Dixie Heritage Hour. Hope you've enjoyed our conversation with Dr. Kent Hovind. Take just a few minutes. Go to his website, drdino.com. Some great books, some great DVDs, some great materials there. Also, if you have a church or a school or a group and you'd like to have Dr. Hovind come and speak, he is an excellent preacher and an excellent speaker, speaks on any of a number of Christian, biblical, political, creation science There's a wide number of topics that he would come and speak on to your group or your church. And usually he's happy to come just for a love offering or passing the hat. He doesn't charge large honorariums like some speakers do, and I know that he'll be a blessing to your group. So thank you once again for listening to this week's broadcast, and until next week, God bless.